Mark, you were just on a panel about the internal combustion engine versus the electric vehicle.
Right.
You started with the story. Why don't you tell us the story?
So the story goes, every story starts with once upon a time. So once upon a time, everybody used the gas ones. The gas ones were the standard. There's a huge infrastructure to support the gas ones. The researchers were working on electric ones, but they didn't work very well. They were unreliable, they didn't last very long, they were very expensive. But they kept working on them. And suddenly, eventually, they had the breakthrough aha moment, and the electric ones were good enough. Good enough to replace the gas ones. And in about a decade, an entire infrastructure of gas was ripped out, an entire infrastructure of electric was put in, and almost 100% market share change happened very, very quickly. Of course, what am I talking about? The Edison light bulb. And they built the Gigafactory. GE built a Gigafactory to make millions, billions of light bulbs. And nobody thinks that gas should have survived as a light. It's gone. And you don't have to change too many words. In fact, you don't have to change any words in that story to think that it might apply to what's happening with the improvements in batteries, in chemistry, in performance, in price. And that's going to enable electric cars to really take a different kind of role than the corner case they're currently in.
Well, and that was the panel was intriguing because it seems like everyone kind of agreed that this would happen. This is going to happen. The electric will dominate at some point. Right. I guess that's the question: is when is that point? Are we at that point where we were with the electric light bulb?
We're at the beginning of it. The current vehicles you can buy, having 70, 80, 100-mile range, sort of doesn't satisfy people, but that's kind of the limit of the affordable mass market car. But over the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot more models with a lot lower battery prices, Tesla's Gigafactory, improvements in chemistry, improvements in manufacturing. I think we're at the beginning of that tipping point to where you'll go from, wow, that car doesn't really work for me, or maybe it only works as a second car, to saying, no, that's my primary car now.
One of the things you mentioned, models and design, and people, love to drive, but with the design freedom that you now suddenly have when you can eliminate the steering wheel, the car becomes the driver, if you will, becomes the recognized driver. From a BMW perspective, what does that do to your imaginations?
It really does free up. Even before you worry about taking out steering wheels and pedals, which is a much more contentious issue, going to an electric drivetrain and putting batteries under the floor gives an enormous amount of design flexibility to have two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, no tunnel, flat floor, much more seat spacing, much more luggage spacing, with all that torque, amazing performance in a vehicle that can be any size. I think BMW gets it partway. I think we're entering a time where price and size get decoupled. And that's an interesting time. I think there's a lot of people who want a small but high-tech car. And today, if you want to sell a $30,000 car, it has to be small. If you want to sell a $100,000 car, it has to be very large. And we're going to break that. And you're going to pay for tech, for autonomy, for crash proofing, for a car that won't let you fall asleep, or that lets you sleep and it'll drive anyway. So we're going to see all those changes, and I think that's going to be a breakthrough.
Yeah, my friend Michael Robinson calls it a wearable, right? It becomes a wearable almost, the car does.
I think, that won't change the fact that the cars are still an emotional purchase.
Right. Well, I think that's
although the big question of as we go to a car that can be shared, or that economically it just makes sense to share. A lot of people getting rid of the second car and using Uber. Do they care what brand or what design the Uber car is? Right now they don't, but I think that whole market's going to mature as well, so that when a family requests a four-wheel drive to go skiing, that's what'll show up in 3 minutes. But when you request a small car to take one person to work, that's what'll show up. And that, we're going to go from a monolithic Uber to a plethora of Ubers. Uber for kids, Uber for delivery, Uber for commute, Uber for cars for the weekends. Obviously, most of them not owned by Uber. There'll be a whole ecosystem industry around all this.
And I imagine, I know with your Drive Now thing, you've even innovated in how you charge, the mobile charging, right? So, I mean, even that's going to evolve, I suppose.
I'm a big believer in workplace charging. I mean, for people who live at home, I mean, home charging is clearly just easy. We charge our phones every night. We charge our car every night. It's great for the grid. It's great if you can get rate plans to make that work. So I think that's going to be huge. But for the other half of the people who live in apartments or renters, you know, to charge at work, and it's quickly becoming, it's a very interesting transition. Charging used to be a facilities issue, and the guy who owned the parking lot had to decide, I'm gonna put chargers in. No, he didn't care why. It's now becoming an employee benefit, and when the company hires 100 new employees, they call up and say, I need 20 more chargers. And it just happens. It's part of, you know, when they budget for a new person, they budget for a computer and they budget for a charging station.
Well, and that gets to the whole built environment. Are you guys getting involved much in how the things you're doing is going to impact, you know, things like parking and how even buildings are built?
BMW is partly involved in that. But the good news is there's a lot of organizations. Even I got approached by an organization called the Urban Land Institute. Never heard of them, but you know, this is the association of all the real estate developers, and they're looking at how do building codes change. Now they require a certain number of parking places per 1,000 square feet of office building, for example. But maybe that's going to change to you need a certain number of drop-off locations. But you don't need a lot of parking because the Uber car can drop you off and disappear. Yeah. Where does it disappear to? Well, maybe it goes to a charging lot, but you're not going to use super expensive downtown real estate to make a charging lot when you can put it out near the airport or something. Yeah. Of course, an airport, which today is a small building surrounded by very large parking lots, could look really different too because most people get dropped off and the car goes and does something else. So you can really redesign the city and really redesign buildings. And land use changes, cities change, everything changes as we get to electrified, connected, autonomous, shared cars.
Excellent. Mark, always appreciate catching up with you.
My pleasure. Good to see you. Thanks.